My name is Helen Monroe. I'm 72 years old, and I've lived in the same modest house in the suburbs of Illinois for nearly 4 decades. My days are simple now: mornings with coffee on the porch, afternoons spent pruning rose bushes, and evenings filled with quiet. I never imagined that a single phone call could slice through all that peace like a blade. It happened on a Thursday. I was out back trimming my rose bushes when my phone buzzed in the pocket of my cardigan. I wiped my gloves on my apron and answered without checking the caller ID. Only one person ever calls me anymore, my son, Mark. "Hey, Mom," he said. His voice was tight, rehearsed, like he'd practiced the words ahead of time. "I just wanted to let you know, Lucas's wedding is on Saturday. We all talked, and we think it's probably better if you don't come." Just like that. He didn't stutter. He didn't pause. And he didn't offer an explanation beyond a polite execution. I said nothing, not because I was shocked. I wasn't. Something in my gut had been bracing for this moment for weeks. I just let the silence stretch out, listening for the guilt I hoped might surface in his voice. Instead, he added, "It's not personal. Tina said it might be too much for you with your memory issues and all." My memory issues. So I almost laughed. I'm not a ghost, not a patient in a care facility. I still cook every meal from scratch, manage my finances, and I've never once forgotten a birthday. But Tina, my daughter-in-law, with her perfect posture and ever-firm smile, had been planting those seeds for months, if not years. I didn't even ask who we all meant. I already knew. Tina, of course. Probably Lucas too. Maybe even one of her cousins who calls herself a life coach after taking some online certification. "It's what Lucas wants," Mark added, as if that would soften the blow. I looked up at the sky. 2 hawks circled above the old sycamore tree, gliding without care or sound. "Okay," I said, and hung up. Then I stood there for a long moment, phone still in my hand, until the screen went dark. I walked back inside, my feet moving on instinct more than intention. I pulled the wedding invitation off the fridge, a cream-colored card with embossed lettering that I had once admired, and dropped it in the trash without a word. There were no tears, no shouting, just a quiet decision to keep going, because what else was there? I opened the freezer and pulled out a batch of cookie dough I had prepped weeks ago. Lemon sugar with white chocolate chips, Lucas's favorite. I had planned to bake them as wedding favors, a small touch of love from his grandmother. Now they were just cookie dough. Still, I slid them into the oven. The kitchen filled with the scent of citrus and vanilla, just like it used to during birthdays, holidays, and every visit Lucas made as a boy. I sat at the kitchen table, cradling my chipped World's Best Grandma mug, staring into nothing, while the oven ticked and hummed behind me. When the cookies were done, I packed them neatly into a clear container, tied a ribbon around the lid, and walked them down the block to Mark and Tina's house. I left them on the porch with a sticky note that simply read, "For the celebration." I didn't knock. I didn't want to see their faces. I walked home slowly, unsure whether I felt more like a ghost or a fool. At night, I turned my phone on silent. The light blinked with message after message, none of which I opened. Because the worst kind of betrayal doesn't scream, it whispers, smiles, and says it's for your own good. It hides behind concern and pretends to be love. And if they were going to erase me from the story, I decided then I wouldn't go quietly. The morning after that call, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up like it always did. Same joggers, same dog walkers, same delivery vans. But nothing felt familiar anymore. There's a strange kind of silence that comes after you've been cut out of your own family. It's like watching your life through a thick pane of glass. Everyone keeps moving, and you're just not there. I thought about all the years I gave to Mark. I was 26 when his father died in a factory accident. I never remarried, not because there weren't chances, but because I didn't want Mark to ever feel like he came second. I worked double shifts at a diner and cleaned houses on the weekends. Every dollar I earned went toward keeping him in private school so he'd never have to grow up like I did, counting change for groceries, dodging eviction notices. I still remember the day he came home at 11, grinning ear to ear, holding a science trophy. "I told everyone my mom is the smartest person I know," he said. I held on to that memory for years, even as the words stopped coming. Tina came into our lives about a decade ago. She was always polite, too polite, smiling constantly, but always finding a way to twist the conversation just enough to make me feel like I'd done something wrong. The first time she came for dinner, she said my meatloaf tasted very nostalgic, like it belonged in a museum. I laughed it off. But then she began suggesting Mark handle my prescriptions, asked if I had a will. hinted that maybe I should look into assisted living before a fall forces the issue. I thought it was concern. It wasn't. 3 years ago, I got pneumonia and spent 8 days in the hospital. My goddaughter Natalie came to stay with me during recovery. She's not blood, but she's always treated me like more than just a holiday obligation. She's in finance and knows how the world works. Natalie convinced me to set up a living trust, something I'd never considered. She connected me with a lawyer and helped me draft the documents. I kept Mark as the primary beneficiary. I still believed he'd do right by me. But Natalie, bless her heart, insisted on including a special clause, what she called a kill switch. If certain conditions were met, I could remove and reallocate everything without anyone's permission. At the time, I thought it was dramatic. Now, it's the only reason I still have any control left. The trust held just over $1.2 million. That's not a fortune by today's standards, but for someone who started with nothing, who clipped coupons, sold a rental home she'd managed for 20 years, and invested every cent of her life insurance payout, it was everything. A lifetime of choices, sacrifices, and they knew it. Mark knew. Tina definitely knew. They had been quietly planning their future around money they never earned. Lucas's down payment for a new house was scheduled to come from that trust, along with what Mark once called his early retirement cushion. But they forgot something. When you make someone feel like they're nothing, you'd better pray they don't remember they still have the power to change everything. That morning, I pulled out my safe box and reviewed every document. Natalie had been thorough. I could legally and fully reallocate the trust with just 2 notarized forms. No permission required. No discussion necessary. And I already knew who I wanted to name. Not out of spite, not out of vengeance. Out of proof. Proof that I had existed. That I mattered. That I wouldn't just disappear from their tidy little narrative, excised like a bad memory. I called Natalie that afternoon. She picked up on the second ring. "What did they do?" she asked, like she had already sensed it was time. I told her everything. The call, the invitation, the note I left on the porch that no one acknowledged, the silence that followed. She didn't ask if I was sure. "Okay," she said firmly. "Let's remind them who they underestimated." By sundown, we had a meeting scheduled with the attorney. For the first time in days, I slept soundly. Not because I wasn't hurt, God knows I was, but because I finally had a plan. It wasn't revenge I was after. It was something quieter, something deeper. It was dignity. And I was ready to reclaim mine. 2 days before the wedding, I stood in the grocery store, staring blankly at a bottle of vanilla extract, unsure why I was even there. I had planned to bake Lucas's favorite lemon bundt cake for the rehearsal dinner at tradition since he was 10. But now I wasn't invited. Still, I walked the aisles out of habit, picking up butter and sugar like I had so many times before. At checkout, the cashier, Lisa, who'd worked there since high school, smiled and asked, "Excited for the big weekend?" I nodded and muttered something about being busy. Inside, I felt like I was melting from the inside out. It wasn't just about being excluded. It was how everyone assumed I would be there. That's how woven into the fabric of this family I used to be. Back home, I placed the ingredients in the pantry. Maybe someday I'd find a reason to use them. That night, I opened Facebook, even though I usually avoid it. Curiosity won. Tina had posted a black and white engagement photo of her and Lucas on the beach. The caption read, "This weekend we say I do, surrounded by those who've loved us unconditionally." The comments were full of hearts and congratulations, but one comment stopped me cold. "So proud of you for cutting out the toxic energy. Blood isn't always family." Another chimed in, "Protect your peace." I clicked deeper into a photo album titled Final Prep. I saw the bridal shower, the rehearsal dinner setup, even the welcome bags, custom monogram totes filled with local treats and handwritten notes. I had paid for those. I had written those notes, but not once was I tagged. Not once was I mentioned. Then I saw a video taken inside my living room months ago during the engagement planning dinner I hosted. It had been posted without my knowledge, cropped just enough to cut me out of the frame, but I saw my wallpaper, my tea set, the clay vase Lucas made me in 3rd grade still sitting on the mantel. They'd erased me with surgical precision. I closed the app and sat in silence. The room suddenly felt too loud. I walked to the kitchen, opened the drawer where I keep sentimental things, and pulled out an old graduation card from Lucas. It read, in his handwriting, You're the reason I believe in family. I hope I make you proud. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my coat pocket like armor. I had been erased. But I was not gone. The next morning I baked another batch of cookies, just one tin, and left it on their doorstep. No note, just a ribbon and a label with Lucas's name. It wasn't an olive branch. It was a statement. I was still here. That afternoon, Natalie texted, "Docs are ready, just say when and we make the move." I stared at that message for a long while before replying. Monday, first thing. And just like that, the countdown began. The morning I was set to sign the papers, I woke up with a strange kind of calm. I dressed neatly: slacks, a soft blue blouse, and the gold earrings Tom gave me in 1982. I only wore them on days when I needed to remember the woman I once was, before life chipped away at her softness. Natalie picked me up at 9 a.m., sharp. She handed me coffee, her briefcase beside her, and gave me a look that said no one would bulldoze me again, not while she was around. At the law office, the attorney, Shannon, a woman with kind eyes and a voice like steel, guided us through the paperwork. "This," she said, pointing to the top page, "removes Mark Monroe and Tina Monroe as beneficiaries to the Helen Monroe Family Trust. The new recipients will be Natalie Collins, effective immediately, and Lucas Monroe, pending one condition." She looked up at me. "Do you still want that clause included?" I nodded. "Yes, if he doesn't come to see me in person within 30 days, he gets nothing." Shannon raised an eyebrow but didn't question it. The pen felt heavy in my hand, but I signed every line. Natalie added her signature as witness. When the final page clicked into place, Shannon assembled the folder and said, "It's now legally binding." As we left, Natalie handed me an envelope. "Transfer receipt," she said. $250,000 already moved to my name. It's the test. If they notice it, and they'll know something's changed." I said nothing, just took the envelope and watched the trees blur past the car window on the way home. That evening, just before dinner, my phone buzzed. Mark. I let it ring. It buzzed again 5 minutes later. Then a text. "We need to talk. Urgent." Another. "Is this about the trust? Lucas's down payment was in there. What's going on?" I didn't reply. Because they only notice me when something costs them. And now, for the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. I was undeniable. I didn't hear from Lucas for 3 days after that. And I told myself I wasn't counting, but every time the phone rang or someone knocked on the door, my breath caught for just a second before I forced myself back to stillness. On the 4th day, just after lunch, there was a knock at the front door. No warning. Just 3 slow taps. I opened it, and there he was. Lucas. He stood on my porch alone, holding a folded piece of paper. His suit jacket was wrinkled, his eyes tired, and in his expression was something I hadn't seen in years: uncertainty, like he wasn't sure if he still belonged here. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I nodded and stepped aside. He entered slowly, glancing around like the living room was a forgotten museum. His gaze rested on the wall where I still kept the photo of us baking cookies when he was cuddle. "I read everything Dad gave me," he said, stopping in the center of the room. I listened to that voicemail, the one Tina edited. I confronted her. He paused, then added, "She didn't even deny it. She said it was for my own good." I stayed quiet. Let him speak. "I thought you didn't want to be there, Grandma," he said, his voice thick. "I thought you were angry. Or maybe not well. I didn't know how much of it was real." Then he unfolded the paper in his hand. It was the photo us covered in flour, mid-laughter, arms wrapped around each other. "This has been in my wallet for years," he whispered. "Whenever I was scared or stressed, I'd look at it. But the past month I kept telling myself maybe it didn't mean what I thought it did." I reached out and held his hand, the same hand I once guided across the street when he was small. "You came here," I said, "not for money, but for truth. That's all I ever needed." And for the first time in years, I saw not a man conditioned by someone else but my grandson. The one I used to know. We were still here. And that meant something. 2 days later, Mark called and asked for a meeting. "All of us," he said. "You, me, Lucas, Tina, and Natalie if she's willing. Aunt Sarah too." I hadn't spoken to Sarah, my late husband's sister, in over a year. That he mentioned her now meant one thing: the truth had begun to take hold. We need to get everything out in the open, he added. I agreed, but on my terms, my house, my time, my rules. Sunday afternoon, I set up chairs in the living room. On the coffee table, I arranged 6 folders, each one containing a copy of the amended trust, screenshots of fabricated texts, bank transfer logs, voicemail transcripts, including the one Lucas had recorded just days ago. One by one, they arrived. Mark walked in first, shoulders stiff, eyes worn. Lucas followed, calmer this time. Tina came in last, her mouth a tight line, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Natalie was already seated beside me, calm, composed, notebook in hand. Sarah, too, entered quietly, a pen clipped to her sweater like she was taking depositions. Once everyone sat, I began. I want to make something clear, I said. This isn't about revenge, it's about accountability. I handed out the folders. What you'll find inside, I continued, are records of the last 6 months, messages I never sent, conversations I never had, but they were used to erase me. Tina scoffed. This is absurd. You're treating this like a courtroom. I looked straight at her. You're right, because the only thing you ever ran from was proof. Mark flipped through the pages in silence. Lucas had already seen most of it, but now he was seeing the scope, laid bare. Natalie spoke next, her voice steady. Every transaction, every clause, everything is documented. The trust is legal. The clause about Lucas visiting Helen was fulfilled. The funds are lawfully distributed? Tina turned to Mark. Are you really just going to sit there and let them do this to me? Mark didn't even look up. You lied, he said, voice low. To me, to Lucas, to everyone. And I let you? Tina exploded. She's been playing the victim for decades. That's when Sarah leaned forward and said, cold and clear, no, I've seen this before. You're just louder now and sloppier. And in that moment, the room shifted. The silence wasn't protecting Tina anymore. It was protecting me. Tina stood, her face flushed. You're seriously kicking me out? Mark didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I'm asking you to step out, he said, so the rest of us can speak honestly without being manipulated again. She muttered something under her breath, grabbed her purse, and slammed the door behind her. Mark remained standing, his gaze heavy as he looked around the room, finally seeing the damage, the rot, the silence they'd all walked over for far too long. I should have stopped this sooner, he murmured, but I kept thinking it would get better, that it was just stress or miscommunication. I didn't want to believe I'd handed over my mother's dignity for peace. I nodded once. It was the only acknowledgement I could give without breaking. You believed comfort over clarity, I said gently. That's what most people choose, until it costs too much. Sarah closed her notebook with a soft snap. What now? She asked. I reached for one final envelope and passed it to Mark. This is my last revision, I said. It removes you permanently from the trust. Not to punish you, but because trust isn't about money. It's about knowing someone will protect your name, even when you're not in the room. He opened it, read the lines, and nodded slowly. I understand. Lucas looked between us, unsure. I reached into my pocket and handed him a single sheet, his reinstatement, signed and notarized that morning. You earned it, I said, by showing up, by asking questions, by seeing me again. He held the paper like it was more than legal, it was personal. Mark folded the envelope and placed it back on the table. I don't expect anything, he said quietly, but I'm sorry, not just for this, for all of it, for letting her take your place. I looked at him for a long moment before replying. An apology isn't the end, Mark, it's the beginning, but only if your actions change too. He nodded again. And this time, when he walked to the door, I didn't stop him. Because finally the silence was mine to break. The wedding came and went a week later. I didn't attend. Not because I wasn't welcome anymore, but because I chose not to go. I had seen enough, injured enough, and what I needed from this family was no longer a photo in their album or a polite smile over whores do-overs I helped pay for. What I needed was already happening quietly, finally in the space they never thought I'd claim for myself. The day after the ceremony, Lucas came to visit. He wore the same suit, minus the tie, and carried a small bakery box with 2 slices of wedding cake inside. We sat on the porch in the late afternoon sun, eating in silence until he finally said, "It wasn't the same without you." I nodded. I didn't need to say anything. She kept her distance, he added. Dad told her if she so much as looked at you sideways again, he'd file for separation. She didn't take it well. And you? I asked, looking at him carefully. He paused. I don't know yet. I love her. But I see things now I didn't let myself see before. It's hard to look at someone the same after hearing them lie in your voice. I let the silence settle before I spoke. I'm glad you saw it. And I'm glad you came to me before it was too late. He pulled something from his pocket, the same flower-covered photo of us in my old kitchen. I had it in my wallet at the altar, he said, not for luck, for truth. And that's when I knew. This wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about being seen. And finally, I was. After Lucas left, I walked back inside. I took the wedding invitation, the one I'd hidden in the drawer, and placed it in a photo album. Not to preserve it like a treasure, but to file it away like a record. Right beside it, I tucked in the legal documents that changed everything. I wasn't erasing history. I was recording it properly. That night I poured myself a glass of wine, turned off my phone, and sat in my favorite chair by the window. The cicadas hummed outside. The house was quiet, not the kind of quiet that aches, but the kind that finally feels earned. No noise, no pretending, just peace. Because here's the truth I want anyone listening to hear. You don't need to shout to reclaim your worth. You don't need a scene to demand your dignity. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is simply stop explaining yourself and start acting like your value is never up for debate. The world may try to write you out. But if you keep showing up in your truth, they'll have no choice but to read your name aloud. So if this story meant something to you, if you've ever felt invisible in the places you gave your whole heart to, then I hope you remember. You are not a footnote. Faith is set. You are the author. And the pen is still in your hand. If this spoke to you, take a moment to like, share, or comment below. Let someone else know. It's never too late to rewrite your story.